Okay, so last time on Synonymous Bosch, we learned a lot about the history of the Guillermo brothers and how they came from Italy and to escape the dictatorial reign of Mussolini in Italy. And um, they ended up getting off on the wrong train station and ending up finding their way into a circus. And it was pretty cool. And they really liked it. And they really felt like they were, kind of in more of a home situation than they had ever really been. So, after a series of mishaps, they ended up just joining the circus and becoming very, very good magicians. But not just because they were good at showmanship, they were also had, if I can remember the name of it, it was like um syn synof synophilia. I'll have to, I don't remember the exact name of it, but it's the confusion of the senses, which means when they smelled like licorice, they could hear like an oboe instead of smelling licorice and thinking of the candy. They heard the sound of a musical instrument. Or if they saw certain colors, then they saw numbers instead of the color. So it was very it was very easy for them to be like, "Hey, what's your favorite color?" Or what's your dog's name? And then, do some showy things with some colored napkins and handkerchiefs and stuff and be able to talk to their adjacent brother, and then, be able to do magic that way and communicate. Woo, that scared me. There's an ant in my room. Ah, sorry. That was. We are having an ant problem. So sometimes I step on ants. Good times though. Anyway, so um so we learned that about them, and then when they finished reading The Magician's Notebook, they realized um that there had been an assembly called and they had missed it. Max, Ernest, and Cass had missed it, and they were told by Amber, the school sweetheart, that Benjamin Blake had gone missing. The boy who did the paintings, he had gone missing, and if anybody had seen him, they were supposed to report to Miss Johnson's office. Well, Cass didn't think that anybody would believe her when she told them that the creepy man and lady who came to see if the school was right for their son hadn't kidnapped him, as Cass had seen him in the back seat or in the rear window of the Midnight Sun's limousine. So with that, um, Cass and Max Ernest had a falling out, and Max Ernest stayed behind while Cass um, called the Midnight Sun and told them that she was the third and hidden sister in the Skeleton Sisters, um, who make they're kind of like singers that also have their like a cosmetic line of lip balm and like lip glosses and stuff. So she called them to let them know that she was coming so that she could see, kind of rescue Benjamin herself, um, after she had a run in with Miss Johnson because she wrote a ransom note to try and get Miss Johnson to to take her seriously and bring the police to the Midnight Sun. And that didn't happen. Cass took matters into her own hands. And with that, we begin our chapters. Chapter 18. It was a dark and stormy night. Do. Really, it was a dark and stormy night. As if the weather itself had conspired to turn our tale into a ghost story, or as if This seems slightly more plausible. Miss Mavis somehow controlled the skies and was using them to obscure the events of the evening. In any case, weather makes my job easier. It creates the proper mood, and it eliminates the need to hide certain facts, like location and street corner on which Cass was waiting. With all the rain, you could hardly have even seen her anyway. For Cass, sadly, the weather didn't make things any easier, only wetter and colder. Teeth chattering, she stood under the street lamp, clutching her backpack to her chest for warmth. Not that it was much help. The backpack was no drier than her clothing. It had been much it had been difficult to figure out what to wear. After a phone call conversation with Miss Mavis, Cass had gone back home again and rifled through her mother's closets. She even tried on a dress for the first time in over a year. Despite her recent growth spurt, she still looked like she was playing dress up when she put on her mother's clothes. She also considered borrowing Amber's Horace honorary skeleton sister t-shirt, but she couldn't bring herself to call and ask for it. Plus, Cass realized a real skeleton sister probably wouldn't wear the t-shirt anyway. Finally, she chose to wear her usual jeans and sweatshirt, but she modified the outfit with a pair of furry boots and her mother had bought her for one of their never-taken ski trips. They didn't look exactly like the fuzzy boots that Amber and her friends wore, but they were close enough. I know at the beginning of this book I told you Cass would never wear boots like these. I forgot, I was forgetting she might wear them as a part of a disguise. Now, she regretted the boots. Not only were they too big, they were soaked through. Her feet sloshed around in them, and they splattered when she walked. She felt like Bigfoot. Her other new accessory was equally impractical for the weather, a pair of sunglasses. But even Cass knew that celebrities wore sunglasses all the times, indoor as well as out. Also, they helped disguise her face, which presumptuously is why celebrities wear them. Had Cass asked me, I would have told her that I always tell people when they are trying to go incognito, lose the shades. They only make you look more conspicuous. Cass felt certain that neither Miss Mavis nor Dr. L would recognize her. They had seen her face for only a second, but it was best to be careful. Cass, her backpack, it goes without saying, she never considered leaving. Never mind whether a skeleton sister would have worn it or not. Cass thought wistfully about the hot pot of tea that Grandpa Larry would undoubtedly be making on a rainy night like this one. She wished she'd stopped at the fire station for a cup before heading out to meet the Midnight Sun limousine. Instead, she'd phoned her grandfathers and told them she was staying overnight at Max Ernest's house to work on another volcano experiment, for which the due date was being kept conveniently postponed. She slept there all the time, she added, and her mother had already spoken to Max Ernest's parents, so there was no reason to ask her mother for permission. Her grandfathers asked a few questions and demanded Max Ernest's phone number, but they were still feeling so guilty for making her upset about the symphony of smells that they hadn't given her much trouble. The hardest part was having to listen to Grandpa Larry and Wayne argue about whether she should make her volcano erupt with Alka-Seltzer or dry ice. You trust me, right? Cass asked. She felt a little guilty herself playing on their guilt, but she needed to get off the phone. Of course we do, they assured her. Then she called her mother and told her pretty much the same thing. Except to her mother, she said it was her grandfathers who had spoken to Max Ernest's parents, so there was no reason to phone them. And don't call And don't call me at 9 tonight, okay? Cass asked. Max, Ernest, and I are going to be working. Just don't stay up too late, said her mother. All right. All right, Cass. Uh-huh. Promise? Uh-huh. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Yes, Mom. Yes, what? Yes, I promise. Okay. I love you. Me too. Me too, what? I love you too. Sheesh. Although she and Max Ernest weren't collaborators anymore, and it was sort of cheating to ask for help, Cass had no choice but to call him too. She had to warn him that he might hear from her grandfathers, or even from her mom. She'd been very businesslike with Max Ernest, she thought. She told him where she'd hidden the magician's notebook, and she gave him all the information she had about the Midnight Sun, and she didn't say anything about his abandoning their mission, or being a coward or a traitor. Somehow, with all the activity, she'd forgotten that she'd been the one to end the partnership. He didn't say much at all, for a change, which was fine with her. Hopefully, he would be able to play it off she was staying with him, at least until morning. Then, well, everyone would start looking for her. Probably, but would it be too late? She didn't see the limousine until it splashed to a stop in front of her, glistening with the raindrops. As Cass waited, the driver got out and walked towards her. Heedless of the storm, the driver was big and tall and shadowed in the darkness. Save for a pair of white gloves gleaming in the night, was it Dr. L? Every instinct Cass told her to run, but something that was not quite bravery, and not quite fear, and not quite the knowledge of Benjamin's plight kept her rooted in her spot. Miss Skelton? The voice was gruff, not as deep as Cass expected. Yeah, that's me, said Cass forcefully, as she could. I'm Daisy. Daisy stepped into the light, revealing a deliciously unflower-like, but indisputably female face. Without another word, she opened the limousine back door and beckoned Cass inside with a gloved hand. Reminding herself she was a celebrity and not the type of person to be intimidated by a limousine driver, even if the driver was the tallest woman she had ever seen. Cass held her head high and climbed in as confidently as if she rode in limousines every day, and Daisy were her own personal chauffeur. Only after she'd settled into a plush velvet seat did Cass notice how violently her hands were shaking. She had to sit on them to get them to stop. Hours passed in silence, Cass barely able to see outside the foggy windows. Generally, she could tell where they were heading upward, but the limousine made too many turns that she lost all sense of directions. Too late, she thought of Hansel and Gretel and how you're supposed to leave a trail of crumbs when you journey into the forest. If nobody came for her, how would she find her way back? She told herself to stay calm, but doubts kept creeping into her head. Previously, she'd been so focused on getting to the Midnight Sun that she hadn't stopped to think about what she would do once she got inside. Now that she appeared really to be on her way, she wondered how she would find Benjamin and how she would get him back out. In the back of her mind lurked darker questions. Why had Dr. L and Miss Mavis taken Benjamin? What did they want him for? What had happened to the magician's brother, Luciano? Would she find him? Would she find him too? Still a prisoner after so much time? He would be an old man by now. His circus days long gone. And what about the magician, Petro, himself? What was a terrible secret that he had discovered? Was she strong enough to face it if she had to? Suddenly, the limousine rounded a turn, and broke through the clouds. Cass wiped the fog off the window next to her and looked outside. The sky above her was now clear and starry, suggestive no longer of ghost stories, but rather the science fiction of space travel. Perfect sky for spotting comets or for studying constellations. If only Cass had had the time to an inclination. Unfortunately, she had neither. Cass couldn't tell much about their location except that they were near the top of a mountain. Below them, a vast white blanket of clouds illuminated by the moon, spread out as far as she could see. The limousine made another sharp turn and then descended into a small hidden valley. "Look," Daisy commanded, breaking the silence. Only then did Cass become aware of the warm glows surfacing the landscape around them. Craning her neck, she could just make out the source of the glow. An intense golden light peeking over the edge of the mountains. It looked like a sunrise, but it couldn't have been. The time was just before midnight. "There it is," said Daisy. The midnight sun. The midnight sun. Chapter 19. The Midnight Sun. So here we go. Chapter 19. The Midnight Sun. I hope it's not giving away too much to tell you that only 2 days later, the midnight sun would be devoured by fire. How and why it was on fire, and how and why it was set on fire, and who, if anyone, was burned to a crisp, and whether or not the smell of sulfur was in the air. These are the questions that will have to wait. In the meantime, the midnight sun's fiery fate frees me to describe in detail, because it is gone. And you can no longer find it, no matter how good your information. So many subjects to study in your school prove unnecessary in life. For math, there's always a calculator. For English, there's always spell check. And for history, there's always an encyclopedia. Why would you hold so much knowledge in your head when it's stored up right in front of you? But there is one subject that comes in handy time after time. I am thinking, of course, about Egyptology. To name just one example, a thorough understanding of the mummification process is indescribable, indispensable, whether you are dispatching an enemy or preserving a friend or simply bandaging a head injury. More to the point, if you are familiar with the layout of temples from Egypt, Middle Kingdom, roughly 2000 to 1600 BC, then you already have a sense of what the midnight sun looked like. In particular, the spa was an almost exact replica of a little-known temple to the Egyptian god Thoth. A temple built over a grave of an unnamed pharaoh and accessible only by a 3-day camel ride through the desert. Cass was sadly ignorant of the finer points of Egyptian architecture. She knew enough, though, to recognize a pyramid when she saw one. Passing through the midnight sun's massive gates, she was temporarily blinded by the blazing light. But once her eyes had adjusted, she could see a mid-sized, by Egyptian standards, pyramid standing in the precise center of the spa grounds. Perched on top of the pyramid was something that would have astonished even the most seasoned Egyptian explorer. It was a lantern, but much more than a lantern. A perfect orb. It resembled nothing so much as a rising sun. Inside the fire danced every which way, as if it was fueled not by electricity or gas, but rather by some unknown supernatural force. Although the fire appeared gold at first, a longer look revealed a kaleidoscope of colors in the flames. It was this lantern that Cass had seen earlier peeking over the mountains. Now, the limousine door was open for her. The lantern was so close, she had to shield her eyes, despite the fact she was wearing sunglasses. Had she had a sudden change of heart and decided to make a run for it, the glare would have dissuaded her. Anyone in the vicinity could have seen it as clearly as if the spotlight was shining directly upon her. It was just like a prison, Cass thought. A large, gloved hand helped her out of the vehicle. She assumed the hand belonged to Daisy until she looked up and saw Dr. L's too handsome face smiling down at her, his silver hair glowing unnaturally in the light of the lantern. She stifled a gasp, squeezing her backpack tight in her arms. This was the moment of truth. Would he recognize her? Miss Skelton, welcome to the Midnight Sun. I am Dr. L, he said smoothly, as if he were meeting her for the very first time. Miss Marvis regrets she cannot greet you herself. She keeps to a very strict bedtime, but she has asked me to extend to you every courtesy in her place. Cass nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. The light was making her dizzy, or was it the nerves? Behind her, the limousine quietly pulled away. There was no going back. I know it is bright here, but you'll get used to it, said Dr. L, tilting his head in the direction of the pyramid. That lantern was brought by a ship from Egypt many years ago, but the flame inside had already been burning for thousands of years. Legend has it started when a fireball fell from the sun. Like a meteor? Cass managed to ask. Exactly. Because if the flame never dies, we call it the midnight sun. It is like the sun that never sets. But you must be very tired. He gestured towards the freckled-faced young man in a white tunic, and yet another pair of white gloves, standing silently next to a stone table. This is Owen, your personal butler. He will escort you to your room. Nice to meet you, Owen stuttered. He smiled shyly. Cass breathed a slight sigh of relief. Owen, at least, was not very intimidating. But first, a small formality, said Dr. L. His indefinitely unidentifiable accent was especially strong when he pronounced the word formality. Do you need me to pay? Asked Cass, ready to hand over the credit card her mother had given her. Dr. L chuckled. We'll worry about that later. It's just that we have to look through all of our guests' baggage when they arrive. You want to look through my backpack? Cass asked, alarmed. The Midnight Sun is a place of healing, and we insist that nothing contaminate the atmosphere. Sugar, junk food, firearms, that sort of thing. Cass reluctantly handed over her backpack to Owen, who started removing items for Dr. L's inspection. Cass hoped desperately that nothing would reveal who she was. I see you have come prepared, said Dr. L, drily, as Owen held up Cass's flashlight and binoculars, and several other survivalists gear. What is that? A space blanket? I think you'll find the bedding here quite adequate, quite ample. But of course, one never knows. I must say, you seem much more independent sort than your sisters. My sisters? I mean, you know them? Cass corrected herself, flustered. Certainly. They have been here several times. Miss Mavis is very fond of them. But you must know that... He smiled blandly. Yeah, I knew that, said Cass quickly, her palms sweating. That's why I'm here. Normally, we don't encourage our guests to bring camping equipment, but we will make an exception for tonight. He nodded for Owen to return the backpack. However, I am afraid I will have to ask you for your cell phone. Dr. L added, hopefully, you will appreciate the opportunity for silence and meditation. Cass froze. She always hated silence and meditation, but that wasn't the problem. Her phone was the only thing keep linking her to the outside. If the worst should happen, she might at least be able to send her mother a message or a picture of herself waving goodbye. Cass was about to say she hadn't brought her phone, but then she thought better of it. What self-respecting skeleton sister would leave home without one? The danger of blowing her cover was too great to risk. She reached into her pocket and handed over her phone. Goodbye, she thought, although whether she was addressing the phone or her mother or the whole world, she couldn't have said. As Owen led her to her room, Cass tried to forget her fears and concentrate on her surroundings. The midnight sun, she saw, spread out from the pyramid in several concentric circles. A wide reflecting pool, dotted with lily pads and lotus blossoms, surrounded the pyramid. A courtyard, at least an acre in size, and paved in sandstone, surrounded the reflecting pool. And a series of low stone buildings, fronted by columns, surrounded the courtyard. Flowering vines, jasmine, honeysuckle, and other more exotic varieties crept up the columns, filling the air with their scent, and making the midnight sun seem all the more ancient and secret. I say seem the more ancient and beautiful and secret because in reality the midnight sun was not ancient, but merely old. The doings inside, as you shall soon see, were anything but beautiful. And lastly, now that I am writing about it, the midnight sun is somewhat less of a secret. While the lantern and the pyramid created the effect almost of daylight, the whole midnight sun seemed to be asleep. It was like coming across a remote village in the mid-afternoon and finding the inhabitants had all fallen under a spell behind one of these doors. Cass thought Benjamin was being kept prisoner, or they kept him underground in some kind of labyrinth or dungeon. Perhaps he was underneath her feet at this very moment. Cass imagined a dark corridor lined with prison cells. Benjamin and Luciano and all of their other children all the other children stolen by Miss Mavis, grasping the steel bars, pleading for help. Before she knew it, Cass was standing in her new room, and Owen was bidding her a good night. Can I get you anything before I go? Needless to say, Cass had never had a butler before. She'd never even seen one before, except in the movies and on TV. Owen wasn't anything like a movie butler. First, he didn't wear a tuxedo. Second, he was too young. Owen was that age that is older than a kid but younger than a parent, maybe in age of an uncle or a half brother or a father's first marriage, you know, that age. Third, he didn't have an English accent or even speak properly, but that made it all the more difficult to know how to treat him. I don't want anything, said Cass, trying her best to sound like a bossy heiress. Go away now. Immediately she felt like she had overdone it, and she was too rude. She might make an enemy of Owen. I mean, if that's okay, she added in a friendlier tone. My shoes are still wet. I just want to get out of them. Owen didn't seem to notice her tone, one way or the other. No, in the old days, they made the guests here sleep in wet socks. Wet socks? Why? Asked Cass, making a face. When you have cold feet, your blood circulates to warm up. But they have had other ways now, he said darkly. Before Cass could ask what he meant, he was out the door. Moorish tiles, potted palms, and a bed made to look like a Bedouin tent, an all-arched window facing a pyramid. Her room could have been a bedroom in Giza. At another time, in another circumstances, Cass might have loved staying in a room like this. Now, she could regard the room with only dread. It was the first hotel room she'd ever stayed in. She couldn't help fearing it was the last. She assured herself that her disguise was intact. If Dr. L had recognized her, he wouldn't have welcomed her so courteously. But it was no use. She lay on the bed, tensing every time she heard a sound. In her imagination, the hum of the pool filter was the churning of molten gold, and the rustling of the leaves signaled the presence of angry monkeys coming back for their young. Her idea was to wait in her room until everyone at the spa had gone to sleep. Then she would sneak out and look for Benjamin. As the hours passed, she kept putting off the moment. Even after the pyramid lantern had finally begun to dim, she told herself to wait a little longer, just to be safe. If you've ever slept anywhere other than your own home, then you know how it's often difficult to fall asleep in a strange bed. However, it's equally difficult to stay awake after you've experienced one of the longest, scariest, most exhausting days of your life. Cass fell asleep. She dreamed she was traveling in Egypt, searching for a fabled trove of buried gold. A turbaned guide, who looked strangely like her own butler, Owen, led her into a massive hulking pyramid. Inside, a dark tunnel coiled around, getting narrower and narrower, and going deeper and deeper underground. Cass had to stop, then crawl, had to stoop, then crawl, then slither on her stomach. She had trouble breathing. She wanted to turn around, but she couldn't. She felt claustrophobic, and she was afraid she would suffocate. Then, finally, she saw glittering in front of her 2 spans of gold, creating a giant M. The golden arches. The pyramid innermost chamber was an underground McDonald's? She tried telling her guide no, this wasn't right. She didn't want to go to McDonald's. In order to make their hamburgers, McDonald's raised and slaughtered so many cows that became diseased, and the land was destroyed. Land that should have been used to grow grain and feed hungry people. It was an environmental emergency, and there was so much cow and there was so much cow during that the methane gases made from the dung made the air smoggy. She knew all about it from a documentary she saw with her mom. If he'd just give her back her cell phone, she could call her mom. If only. Please let me out. Please. But Owen, her butler, her guide, wouldn't listen. The magic word had lost its power. Chapter 20. And now, back to Max Ernest. Dun, 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 dun. Remember, guys, little goals, big old dreams. Bye, guys. Have a great night.